economics, and at the intersection of education, and public health. So there's deep intersectionality here that we expect to be fruitful as we have some conversations around the nature of public education, as we have conversations around whether or not these institutions that we trust our future with, that we trust with our students, our children, are these institutions working? And if they are not working, how long have they been failing us? And so there's some particular assumptions that I know I bring to this conversation, and I know these content experts are going to help us wade through, maybe even disabuse me of some of my thinking about where we are. But what we know for sure is that the economy has come to a screeching halt. What we know is that right now we are inching toward 15% unemployment. That those actually could be the numbers now. We'll have to wait until our April numbers come out. But what we know is that last month there were 700,000 jobs that were lost, and in the past 2 weeks there have been 9 million people who have filed for unemployment, which is really dramatizing, demonstrating the economic nature, the economics of public health, and the economics of our education system, because our children are at home, our teachers are at home, and our parents are at home. And our parents are at home expected to be co-educators in ways that they generally are not expected to be, because students are at school the majority of the day. And now parents are having to multitask their workloads, which do not disappear if they're working at home, or navigate what unemployment and being in economic limbo means as they now become co-educators for their children. And so we want to have some robust conversation tonight around how Black churches, how communities of faith that are committed to Black families and Black students and Black people in general can begin to resource parents, resource students, resource teachers as we wade our way through this. And hopefully what we'll know for sure is that while this pandemic has really slapped us awake in a lot of ways, as we've been living in a type of political narcolepsy for a while, and we've been slapped awake by this pandemic. What we know for sure is that this pandemic, more than it is creating problems, it is exposing the kind of structural injustices that have always been at work, and the type of political and economic abandonment that working people, tax-paying people, voting people who are non-white have had to live with for a while. And while this pandemic has been erroneously called a great equalizer, we are seeing all over the country, from Louisiana to Illinois, that the greatest victims, the greatest number of victims for this crisis are in the Black community. 70% of COVID-19 fatalities in Louisiana are Black. 43% of COVID-19 fatalities in Michigan are Black. 40% of fatalities related to COVID-19 in Illinois are Black. And those are going to be the numbers throughout. And so we want to have some conversations that definitely use a racial equity lens, but also digging deeply as we can into how we can begin to use this moment as a chance to reimagine what public education looks like, and also to hone and to raise our voices from the bottom up. So again, welcome to the Black Church Agenda. This is the first of a 4-part series where we're engaging the pandemic, resourcing congregations around the pandemic. I'm Willie Francois. I serve as the president of the Black Church Center. Our founder and board chair, the Reverend Dr. Delman Coates, is with us via phone, and so we're grateful that he is plugged in, and if he has comments, I'll make sure I'll relay them to us as I'll be in contact with Dr. Coates. But I'm grateful today that 2 of our panelists have joined us, and one of the family members of the BCC is with us. Grateful to have Reverend Tim with us, and also to have Kenya Bradshaw with us, who and both of them are deeply committed to these issues on a daily basis. They don't come to this work because of the crisis, but this is the work that they are dissecting, are contesting, are deconstructing and reconstructing within over the course of their lives. Pastor Tim is the pastor of the Bethany Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, and Kenya is a staff member and organizer of the New Teacher Project based in Memphis. And so I'm going to now turn this over to our content experts, and I'm going to ask that Pastor Tim would lead us in a reflection on this moment that I know will be deeply theological, but also be instructive on where we are as a diagnosis, but also give us some prognosis on where we can go as faith community. So, Brother Tim, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Reverend Francois, and certainly it's good to be on the call with you, Sister Kenya. It is a moment indeed, one in which we've literally never seen before. And so I think what's happening is there is an unveiling of what the discrepancies that already exist within the system. So everything is being magnified and taken to the nth degree, and we are pushing a system which was already broken to its absolute limits. The kinds of stressors that parents are under in this moment, the kind of stressors that children are under in this moment are literally unlike anything I've ever seen. The testimony, I think of people in my congregation, for example, I think particularly of students, for example, with special needs and how they don't have access to the kinds of classes, the kinds of one-on-one tutoring and help that they were receiving when they were in school. And the ask of the parents to be not only tutor, not only teacher, but also resource teacher as well is literally taxing folk beyond what I think we ever had prepared for. And so the question becomes then, how can the church continue to support one another, students, teachers, and the system in this moment? And we're triply challenged by the fact that we don't have the opportunity to be able to meet and to gather the way that we normally would. And so we are stretched from a process standpoint, from a content standpoint. And then you have to ask yourself theologically, where is God in all of this? Why did God allow this? The kind of theodicy questions that people are wrestling with now, it's just all combined to create a melange of chaos in a lot of situations. And so I think the role of the church is to be a peace agent in the midst of chaos, to begin to think, or to continue to think, because there's a rich legacy of this certainly, but to continue to think communally about what does it look like for us to help members of our individual churches, members certainly, or families within our communities, but even a level beyond that. This is the time now really to think beyond the kind of direct services that we can offer to individuals within the family, but really begin to think about the same way that Jesus was trying to eradicate systemic ills and systemic sins, for the church to use its leverage to be able to battle against systems. Think about some of the stories in Newark where there are heroes, and we're celebrating heroes of principals of schools who have connections, and celebrities have reached out to be able to purchase laptops for the children in their school. And it's an amazing and beautiful testimony. But I can't help but thinking every time I hear one of those success stories about all of the other schools that don't have those connections, all of the other schools that don't have that same kind of access to resources, because at the end of the day, it's about an access to resources. So I think the church has done and can do a great job with tutoring its own, creating opportunities for learning within the confines of the church. I think that's something we historically done fairly well. On a broader level, I think we've opened the doors to the church so that you don't have to be a member of the church. You can come by for our study hour. It might flow into our youth group, or however individual church is set up. But I think it really, if anything has been put on display, it's the need for churches to leverage the people power that we have to influence policy on a local, state, and yea, even national level. But I really think that before even thinking about moving to the national level, that there's a kind of influence that churches can have on the local level that really affects what life looks like day to day for our children. I mean, even that example I just named in terms of the access to resources. Yes, this pandemic came out of nowhere. Yes, it sprung up and magnified and grew exponentially. But at the same time, the lack of resources is not a new problem. It's not a new issue. This has been happening for decades. And so if we leveraged our power in a more directed way that spoke to the systemic ills on the local level, we'll be better able to see a theology of abundance. Because I think we're often playing catch up, trying to reach, trying to get charity. But if we really want to find justice, we have to operate out of this notion of abundance. Like there is more than enough. And I truly believe that there's more than enough if we pool our resources. Lastly, I'll say, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing Sister Kenya, but I think that in this moment, I've thought so much about the miracle story of the fish and the loaves, and about what it means for the community to come together. Some scholars read that miracle story not as a kind of supernatural notion of Jesus multiplying bread and fish the way that I think so many of us grew up hearing it and knowing it and understanding it in Sunday school, but instead that the little boy bringing his loaves and his little fish that he had inspired the community to then all bring their fish and all bring their loaves. And because of the selflessness of the little boy, that everyone else was able to pool their resources, and now everybody had what they needed to eat. And I think in our education systems, if we can all bring in what we need, then we'll be able to meet the needs of everybody in the community. And our children, whether it be pandemic or something on a smaller scale, when these kind of tragedies occur, that we'll be better suited and better able to be able to take care of them.
Thank you, Pastor Tim, for that brilliant theological reflection on where we are, and also helping us to think through some of the short-term things we can achieve to weather this. So thanks again. I want to remind us that while the Black Church Center is a theological think tank, it is also an action tank. It is a do tank as well. So before we dismiss today, we'll make sure that you get a copy or access to a toolkit that has been developed for congregations for personal use, as for congregation to use and for personal use. And also there will be a survey that will be used in order to help us think through how we can resource and partner with you on the local level, because we do know that these issues, while we are facing what is a national pandemic, it was really a global pandemic, but for us, this pandemic is national in scope. What we know for sure is the local implications are really what we're going to have to chip away at, because all crises are local to some extent, the way all elections are. And so what we need, strong local leadership that's able to engage electeds, able to engage school systems and structures, and able to engage just the policy apparatuses that govern us. And so we want to make sure you'll have access to our toolkit, but also have access to the survey, so that we can get a database going, a national database going, for how we should be organizing, how we should be planning, and how we should be doing resource creation. I'm going to now let Sister Kenya lead us through her portion of this conversation. So, Sister Kenya, it's on you.
I'm sorry, my laptop is about to go dead, and so we're trying to get a plug in. But so I'm going to start. I wanted to first say, Reverend Timothy, thank you so much for the blessing of understanding that, like, our community is never meant to be alone. And so we were always meant to be connected and being able to share resources with each other. Thank you so much. And so, like, I think that's going to be critical, even more critical during this time, that we are our brothers and our sisters' keeper, because that's what is really needed. I wanted to share a little bit with you all this evening, just to talk about what's happening in the education space and what's going on right now, and what do we anticipate coming from a policy lens in the next couple of weeks. So one of the things that we are, my name is Kenya Hajikun Bradshaw. I serve as a vice president at TNTP, and we are a national education consulting organization that works with states and districts across the country. And so we're getting a lens of what's happening all across America and what do our schools really need right now. And so I wanted to share with you this hierarchy of needs for us to get started, because we're still in the place where people are thinking about how do we get organized and how do we think about the safety and security of our families and their basic needs. And so we're still, our schools were really the first responders of what was happening in the crisis across America. So our schools were the first entity around government policies to close down and actually be proactive around the protection of our children and families. Our schools were the first places where there were food distributions. And then we're also thinking about educating our children at the same time. We need to be thinking about, in addition to those things, what's happening with our families at home as we switch the educational role from the teacher, who is a certified professional, to parents, where this may not have been the gift that they had or the role and occupation. And how do we continue to support our families in that? And how do we also have clear and realistic expectations around what our students can and will be learning during this time? And then also, how are we proactively thinking about the time when we return back to school? So our school districts have shifted to home learning. Some of them are doing virtual classrooms, and across the country, many of our schools are actually doing packets that they're sending home with their children at the end of where school got out, or they're putting virtual lessons online where parents can be able to access. But as many of you all know, we have a significant digital divide in our country, and there is just a lack of access that many of our families have. So one of the key things that we need to be doing early is really checking with our families, not just with the district, around what are the resources they have readily available to them. And then our families, we need to see how are they accessing that. One of the big groups that Reverend Tim talks about, who is actually not being served at their fullest capacity at this time, are many of our students who have special needs, or whom English is not their first language. And so how are our districts thinking about how do we address that in virtual times? Some of the challenges and opportunities that we feel like are available to the church, and where you all are uniquely positioned to be able to support our students and our families and our broader community. One is just really around trauma and grief. Many of our communities are suffering right now around both basic necessity needs, but also the trauma of being in a pandemic. How are we helping people understand how they navigate this social emotional support in a virtual environment? The second one is around the digital divide. We know many of our communities do not have access to broadband, high-speed internet, and or computers. And then we also, even if a family has access to a computer, if you have 4 or 5 children in the household, rarely do we have a computer for each child. And so how do we help to make sure that every child has access to the resources and materials that they need? And so we're one of the couple of things that we want to advise you early, where there are opportunities where you all can support communities. Doing the prayer partners and being able to get a phone tree available to check on every member and every child and do a wellness check for them. Offer educational support. So just as Reverend Timothy said, around tutoring. And then after Sunday school, think about adding an academic Sunday school to your services, to where they are doing virtual tutoring. And then helping your family navigate the resources that are available to them. Any family who has a child who receives free or reduced lunch, regardless of if they received EBT or food stamps or SNAP benefits before, are eligible to get emergency food stamps at this time. So we want to make sure that you all are thinking about how are you checking in with them, asking for support. And then to the point that I made earlier about setting realistic expectations, children's learning time is really their age plus a few additional minutes. So what we do in school of keeping their attention for 8 hours, we're using multiple learning methods. That's not normal in a homeschool environment. And so how do we make sure that we are giving grace to families so that they are not thinking that they have to recreate the same structure that goes into a full 7.5-hour school day? When we're thinking about that, a couple of things that we think that you can do is focus on having your middle and high school students request information from their teacher, and then have time for them to read, and then creating space for our kids to be active. Our immune systems, one of the best ways for us to stay healthy is to take some time and exercise every day. The next slide, we're going to put these resources into it's in the deck that Reverend Francois talked about around the toolkit. So these are a couple of easy places that you can be referring your parishioners to be able to go and receive online resources. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the Federal CARES Act, the stimulus package, the $2 trillion fund that many of us have heard that has been passed, and talk a little bit about what's in that packet as it relates to education. One of the things that I will say for pastors, there's also in that packet a payroll protection plan for faith-based leaders. So you all should think about that from the small business perspective that helps you cover the salary for staff of churches as well. For education, there have been 2 buckets that were carved out. So in total, there is $31 billion that has been put in place to be able to support K-12 education. Of that, it breaks down like this in how it's supporting to districts and schools. So a significant portion, so $15.8 billion is allocated for SNAP benefits, which is our food, what we know as food stamps. So that's why I'm telling you, many of your families, if you have had a 50% pay reduction, or if you have children who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, all of those families are now eligible to go online. Every state has an online portal where they can access food stamps for their families. If you were already receiving food stamps, every state is doing an additional supplement for those families to be able to augment to help them during this time. The next bucket is what I stated around the $13.5 billion for them to be able to fund schools. A key piece of this is districts have sole discretion around how they will use those dollars. Those dollars have to go in the same pools of like low income or students with disabilities should receive the most of those dollars. And then they can use those dollars to be able to address some of the areas that Pastor Tim talked about around technology. One of the key requirements around this is that districts should maintain how much they have been funding schools in the past for the next 2 years if they take receipt of those funds. One thing I will flag is that governors asked on Friday to be able to receive those funds and not have to continue to maintain how much they have been funding schools, because we anticipate a significant shortfall on funding because of decreased tax revenue in our schools in the next upcoming year. So this is just showing you how much in total the full piece around education was and where are the different pieces that funding will be going to. I want to flag a couple of policy ideas that we have that we think are areas that we can be focusing on from the congregation, and both at the local level and at your state and federal level. One is just around school funding. So we know when there are reduced local sales tax, reduced taxes around collection of lottery, or reduced property taxes, which we anticipate there will be reduced dollars going into our schools. So how are we making sure that we're prioritizing and working with our local and state government to make sure that our schools when we're defunding some areas, we're also investing in the areas we know we need, such as school therapists, support to be able to augment services that our children who have had special needs will be without services for a significant amount of time. And then how do we think about how do we create summer learning opportunities that are more than just enrichment, that can think about how we're still providing some educational rigor during that time, so we don't have an additional summer learning loss when our kids will be out for, in some cases, to 2.5 to 5.5 months. The second area I think that we need to focus on is the support and having clear expectations for professional development for teachers. So many of our teachers actually aren't equipped to be able to transfer their curriculum over into teaching it on a digital platform. So how do we invest in the e-learning platforms and the materials and the tools to be able to train our teachers and to be able to provide that instruction to them using different platforms? A couple of key things that I want to highlight. We anticipate by April 30th, almost all districts across this country will have made the announcement that school is going to be out for the rest of the year. And so if we know that, how do we then begin to think about the two areas that I'm highlighting at the bottom around assessments? So we will know when we come back to school, where are our children when they have been out of school 3 to 6 months? And how do we make sure we know where they are, and how do we plan for them to catch up or continue to progress? And then the last, and what I feel like is one of the most important pieces, how do we deal with the emotional support that our children, our students, and our teachers are going to need when we return back to school, as they all will have undergone different levels of trauma, whether it be from being home or having lost family members or lost community members. We do anticipate there being another stimulus package. Some of you all have heard about this, where there will be a potential fourth stimulus package that actually will go into remediating some of this. A couple of things that I want to make sure that we're highlighting around priorities. One is just thinking about this work from an equity lens, and how do we begin to think about what is the real education that we want for children of color? Because our current system had not been providing that, and our at-home system is going to be even more inequitable. So how do we think about how we educate our children and provide a whole child community school system approach to be able to make sure that our children are getting the full development that they need? And then lastly, how do we think about how we as a community really organize and serve as the drivers for what education should be, instead of having education and the decisions to our community be told to us, and then we receive that from others? So really hope that you all use this time to be able to convene and have conversations around both how do we support our congregations in the short term, how do we think about what the midterm needs are, and then thinking proactively around the policies that are going to impact them long term. Thank you all for giving me grace this evening as I dealt with my technological problems, and want to make sure that you all, if you all have any questions, if you submit it in the Q&A side, so we can make sure that we answer.
Thank you so much, Sister Kenya, for the thorough layout of where we are, and particularly some very clear direct service opportunities for churches, but also some advocacy opportunities for us, which is beautiful, because generally much of the work that we offer is around structural change and advocacy. But in this moment, the heightened awareness that we must do both, that we don't have the luxury of just engaging the powers, that we have to also do the local empowering and reimagining of our community. So thank you so much for that. We have an educator on the line with us today, and perhaps we'll have another educator that will join us as well. But Darshell Scott is an educator in Atlantic County. She has been an educator in New Jersey for a while, so she is a veteran at this, even as young as she looks. She is also a doctoral student at Stockton University. She is moving toward the end of that process, moving toward dissertation phase. And so we're going to now shift to Darshell as she shares with us from her perspective as an educator, as a parent, but also as a theorist of public education. So, Darshell, we're with you. You're still muted.
Unmute. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having me, Pastor Willie. I'm happy to be here on this evening. Yes, I can speak tonight from a teacher perspective and a parent perspective. Starting from the teacher side, it has been quite a transition for us because everything happened so fast and we didn't have a lot of time to prepare. So that is one of the things that as teachers we're dealing with, because a lot of our materials and things, like if you're not online, if you're not using technology a lot in your classroom, then you do not have access to a lot of the resources, and a lot of the things are still in the classroom. So that was been one of our challenges. We have been having administrative meetings with our administrators weekly, and what we're finding is that most of our students do have access to Wi-Fi, fortunately, but we have some that did not. And like the young lady that was shared before us, we're saying that those that do not have access to Wi-Fi were working on packets, this school provided packets for those students. And then you have the K-2 that do not have devices. So in Atlantic City, in our district, we provided most of the students with their Chromebooks because we are one-to-one. Those that did not, the K-2, like I said, have the packets. Those students that do not have access to Wi-Fi also had packets. There is a program that we did let the parents know about for the local cable companies. If students qualify for free and reduced lunch, they were able to get either free Wi-Fi for a certain period of time, or they were able to get a discounted rate from Comcast. It's called Communication Essentials, and they were able to get it for $9.95 a month. And they were waiving any type of fees. They were also, if you had an outstanding bill, they just waived all of that. So that was a good piece of information for the parents. As an educator, we had parents that were concerned that if their students were doing well, if they were keeping up with everything. So we suggested to them that they create a schedule. And today we sent out a schedule that parents could follow. What we understand is that some of the households have different schedules. Some of the parents that are still working are working different hours, different shifts. So everyone will not be able to follow the same schedule, but we did put something together so that they will treat each day as a regular school day. That was one of the struggles that, some of the children were thinking that summer vacation started early. So we had to keep in mind that these are regular school days and they should be continuously working throughout the day, taking breaks throughout the day, mindfulness activities, brain breaks through sites like Go Noodle. So we shared a lot of these resources with them. As a parent, I had to definitely put my 10-year-old on a schedule. So even in the evenings, I'm still putting him at bed. Maybe I let him stay maybe just an hour later, but he's still following the routine. He's getting in bed, getting his shower. He's getting up in the morning. I'm fixing him breakfast, and he's sitting at his Chromebook during the day getting his work done. So those are the kind of things that we want to keep in mind as the parents are shifting and they're turning into the homeschool teachers. We also encourage them to stay in touch with their teachers if they have any questions. It is our obligation as educators to be readily available for them between the hours of 8 and 3. So if they have any questions, if they have any challenges, if they're struggling with anything, even with the students. And also, like the previous presentation, we are finding that the ELLs are having some challenges because they do not have anyone there to help them directly. So that was another concern that we had. And I think that pretty much covers what the expectations are, at least on the parent side. And we just try to encourage them to just, have their children to stay active, to really, and especially the parents that do not have great relationships with some of their children's teachers, just to reach out to the administrators because they are really available too. In addition, we have not talked about school definitely being over for the school year. We have not talked about what the expectations are if and when we return. We haven't covered any of those things. We are expected to generate some type of grades. We're talking about different ways of doing that. And so that's where we are at this point. And we're just hoping that at some point we're able to get some more solid information to help us accurately make some decisions that we need to make before the school year ends. And we're just encouraging everybody and letting everyone know that we're all in this together.
Thank you, Darshell, for leading us and giving us that perspective. Likewise, I'm grateful that Erica Bell, also an educator, is on the line with us to help us also give us more perspective on particularly the perspective on balancing, if that's even possible, but balancing the immersion into homeschool and parenting. And so however Erica wants to talk with us about that dynamic, about wading those waters, we'll open it up for that time. And then we'll move to a general session of Q&A. So Erica, we're on you.
Like I had mentioned before, we're getting comfortable with this like new norm. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. For me, having the schedule, trying to keep things as normal as it was, but also to be a little bit liberal and to just, we're not in school, so it's hard. It's hard for the children being in a different environment other than the classroom as is for myself, but I'm just doing it, and I try to I have a 4th grader, a 1st grader, and a 2-year-old. So my 2-year-old woke up this morning and she's like, I want to go to school, mommy. And I'm like, they learn in school. So I'm trying to do ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, 4th grade curriculum and 1st grade. But I kind of just get up earlier. I get up a little bit earlier than my kids, and I let them just sleep until around 10 because that's what time their Google Classroom goes in to start. So I'm up at 7, 8, and I kind of prepare my Google Classroom for my students, and I'm available for them if they need to call me, and then I kind of switch over to mommy mode. But try to make them as independent as possible as well, and their teachers are also connecting them. But it's just a juggling act, and if we spill over until after dinner, like tonight, I'm going to be working with my 4th grader, then that's just what we do, and I'm okay with that because now I get a little bit extra time.
Erica, I have a particular question for you, and maybe for Darshell, and then we'll open it up. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of our screen to share those questions with us if you have questions. But to Erica or to Darshell, I've been in conversation with, and Pastor Tim, you may also be able to weigh in on this, that I've been having conversations with my friends who are really dealing with, I guess, the edges of burnout, and although this is very new, but primarily because it's hard to determine when you clock out. And so your workday although you're home, your workday has become longer because you don't have those built-in boundaries, those built-in clock out. You don't just get to go home. There's no break room for you to go to. There are no colleagues that you can go and spend 5 minutes at their desk or at their door or lunch with. So can you talk about how difficult it possibly is to set boundaries for yourselves as parent professionals? And all three of you, the three I just named, although any panelist Sister Ken, you could surely jump in on this as well, because I know you have perspective on this. But this balancing act of setting, not just balancing, but setting boundaries so that you're not overworking and you don't have pandemic fatigue in different ways. So let's just throw that conversation around.
Okay, well, I'll just jump right in. I do find myself working longer now and trying to find a balance. It's a struggle because you have to think about not having the materials that you would normally have in the classroom. So thank God that I am, technology savvy. So I don't have an issue with going online and finding resources that I can connect with Google Classroom. But in that, I'm finding different ways because of the different levels that the children are working on, and with the different levels that my colleagues are working on. Some of them are struggling using Google Classroom. So therefore, I'm having to work with them on the side. We're still answering calls and dealing with children and parents. And then I'm like, okay, wait a second. I got to make sure that my child is doing his work. He's sitting there with me, but I'm getting a call from his teacher. Oh, he didn't finish an assignment and he didn't log in today. And then his school, he's in a different district than what I teach in. His music teacher is doing his music through Google Meet. So it is very challenging to find the balance. And then when you step away from it, you kind of feel like, I better get back in because I feel like I'm going to miss somebody, or I'm going to miss a phone call, or I'm going to miss a child who may need help, because they're all working at different times. Some of the children, they start at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. Some of the children don't log in until 7, 8 o'clock at night. So I'm getting notifications on my phone because every time Google Classroom, somebody makes a comment, somebody submitting an assignment, it's connected to my phone. So my phone is sending these notifications 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. So trying to get myself on the schedule, get my son on the schedule, making sure that I'm keeping up with everything that he has going on. He's in 5th grade. He has 2 teachers and his specials teachers, now his music teacher. And then one additional thing, my son's district is using the Zoom and the Google Hangout, the Google Meet, but my district, we're not doing that because of whatever protocols or whatever, things policies that we have in place in our district. So that's another thing that makes it difficult. So now I'm teaching myself how to use the screencast to try to make tutorial videos for my students. I'm learning how to, use all of these other waves of technology that I haven't used before just to try to reach my students. So it is a struggle trying to find that balance. It really is.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think something that was helpful for me was because even with church work, it was that same temptation to take everything and just replace it online. And so it really took some time stopping and praying and recognizing that this is not normal, right? That this is not normal life, and that the expectation of trying to do everything, not just doing it virtually, is unfair, and it's the kind of thing that would lead to burnout. So it really took going back to some of those Psalms that are really those lament Psalms. I think of Psalm 77, like, God, have you forgotten about us? And really spend some time in the grief and lament of the moment. They really forced me to say, well, hold on, I can't act like everything is normal, trying to manage taking care of kids, pastoring, whatever, our individual jobs are, and just lamenting, right? And just dealing with what's going on in general. So it really took some time to stop and to cry about it for a little while, to be able to sort of force myself to recreate the boundaries that, pastors kind of have to create anyway, lest we get in that cycle of, of things coming all the time too. So it really took some relearning of some things to be able to set those boundaries for me.
I can definitely
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
agree. It's kind of like that with myself, and I kind of learned just being a young mom and a teacher and a coach at one time, is that I cannot pour from an empty cup. So it's not being selfish, but I have to realize that, like, I need a moment, and my kids know it. I'm like, I need a moment. I'm very, like, transparent with God too. Sometimes, like you said, I'm an empath, so I was feeling everything. Oh my goodness, one of my students is homeless, everything. So I had to cry. I get in the shower, or I'll go take a walk. I even go sit on the porch. And my son, he's great because he's a little older. I'm like, watch his sister. I just got to take a moment. And it's just really God just kind of like helps so much because he's our source. And that's just what I do. As far as I know, teaching your own kids, and my issue, I have one kid that's kind of ADHD, and he wants to go get on the game. So it's kind of just making boundaries for them as well, and just keeping it real with them. Like, listen, no, summertime, no, we're gonna do this work, we're gonna get it over with, and then then y'all can have a little bit of free time, and then mommy's gonna work. But it's just, I guess, basically just taking care of yourself too. Even if it's 5 minutes, 2 minutes. Sometimes I haven't been able to sleep lately, so I'll be up at night. I'll read a little devotional, or I'll go on Facebook, whatever it is, to just pour into myself for a minute so that I can pour into others.
And I think the two things for me is just really context. Like, we're not just working from home. We are in living a crisis and trying to work while we are undertaking it. And so, like, trying to make sure that we're not trying to meet the same standards that we would be if we were in normal times, because these are not normal times, and giving ourselves and others the grace to be able to understand it is critically important. And how Sister Erica said, you cannot pour from an empty cup. First, we have to think about how are we as people, and then we think about how are people in our circles around us, and then we think about others. Like, that's going to be critical to be able to maintain our own sanity. And so some of the things that Sister Darshell said around, I've had to set a list of what I'm going to be able to do today, and I set a cutoff time. So I am through with work by 7 o'clock every day. And that's not even normal during my regular work time. But my body is experiencing trauma that I may not even be articulating or may not be able to sing. So how are we giving ourselves and others that grace during this time?
That's good. That's good. We have a question from one in the audience asking, particularly the teachers, and Ken, you may be able to help with what I'm going to add to this question, and that is, how are the teachers? Do you as educators feel like you're being supported by the instructional coaches, specialists, and technology personnel, and also, one thing I think it was touched, but we didn't land on it, is that there's a access to technology problem that exists in our communities, but then there's also proficiency problems. So are there also avenues out there to help the parents and the students navigate this as well? And the reason why I ask that, because my niece, she's a week behind right now in school, because it took a week for somebody from her school to get in touch with my mom or my sister to walk them through. It was as simple as a password that they just didn't have. Like, where's the support for the teachers, and where's the support for the families?
Okay, well, I can say that in my school, we are very well supported. Our administrators, they reach out to us. We give them updates on, what we're working on, and what's working well and what's not working well. And then us as educators, we take it upon ourselves that if we don't see students logging in, that we call to see, is everything okay? Do you have Wi-Fi? Is there something that we can help you with? Also, what I'm finding too is that you have educators who do not know how to use these different pieces of technology. They don't use them in the classroom, so now they're struggling outside of the classroom. So normally, most teachers are using Google Classroom on a regular basis, but those that are not, those are the ones that are having some issues now that we are, working from home. So those are a few of the things that are happening. And then also you have the ELL students. So I have a sheltered classroom. So I had to reach out to some of my other colleagues to ask for help, to, call to translate to the parents, just to make sure that everything is okay in those households, because I have 3 students who do not speak English at all. So I'm, luckily to have, one of my colleagues to work closely with me that is able to translate and give me updates on these families as to what's happening.
I can say I'm pretty blessed in that aspect too. My school, very supportive. We do wellness checks with each other. My supervisors reached out. I'm one of those teachers. I don't really use Google Classroom because I'm like in special ed, so I piggyback on the general educators, which worked while we were in school. But now for my students, I'm self-contained, but I'm kind of doing like a hybrid of giving them their IEP, which are like their basic skills, as well as them getting access to the fourth grade content or the fifth grade content. And I spoke with a parent today, and she's like, I don't know this stuff. My boys are the kids are getting overwhelmed. So we've been kind of working in ways to support the kids. And my school is just phenomenal. And they've been helping me. We also have on the district is also giving like tutorials to parents on how to use Google Classroom and whatnot and things like that.
Okay, good. Let's move to another question, and I want to start this question. Toss this between Kenya and Tim, Pastor Tim, and both of these questions are about, these next several questions are really about the church's role, and all of us should have some vision of how we think churches should be involved. But one question we have is, how can black churches support the health and well-being of teachers in your congregation?
Well, I mean, I think it's layered. I mean, there are things you can do intra-congregation that works. I mean, I think taking the time, it may seem small to outside, but I think taking the time to honor teachers in the life of the church, I think goes a long way towards helping teachers be seen, helping them feel appreciated, thus helping support them that way. I also think that some of the things we mentioned earlier, our fight for the education system as a whole supports our teachers. And so if churches can not only provide space for mentoring, intergenerational ministry, or connecting younger teachers with more seasoned teachers, even within the confines of the church, but also the church fighting for wages and for benefits, and they're fighting for the welfare of the teachers within the system, that those are the kind of things that the church can really lean into and use this collective power to be an even broader support to the teachers in the system, in addition to the short-term individual kind of effort.
Thank you, Reverend Timothy. One thing I want to flag, Darshell and Erica are in well-coordinated districts. We don't have a national system of education, and so it varies by the quality of your school leader. And so because of that, we need churches to really be speaking out and asking these same questions to their districts around, are their teachers actually getting support? Are there much of the staff, the support staff that you talked about around the instructional coaches, the social workers, the psychologists, all of them are still on salary and still working. To what level they are working to support the school, it depends on the coordination of the leader. So most districts did not have a pandemic plan in place on how were they going to do instruction during this time, and nor have they figured out how they're coordinating all the other people. So that's the first thing that I think that's the second thing. The first thing, to Pastor Timothy's point, your teachers are also people. And you don't know, in addition to their role as a teacher, what's happening in their household. So many of them could have a spouse who is laid off right now, or they could have someone in their home who is an essential worker who has to be outside of the home. And so how are you checking with them on how they are as a human being first, and really checking on them in that state, and then supporting them in the role that they have as an educator, and creating space for them to be able to exercise their gifts through the congregation as well.
And as a son of two teachers, I can remember when it was school supply time, when we would be going through the school, going through the stores, trying to get the materials for myself and my siblings, how my mother and my father would always be buying extra things for their classroom. And I think a real communally minded, teacher supported church ministry would say to the teachers present in their congregation, you don't have to do that. All right? We are going to help you make sure that you have the resources that you need to be able to teach, so that you don't have to come out of your own pocket and stress your own family even more to be able to do that. For school supplies, I think about the staff rooms. I know it depends on the school, but just having access just to some hospitality, even within the confines of schools, I think is important. And all the book drives and all those kind of things we do. So I'm really thinking from a resource standpoint that it would help our teachers so much to be able to support them and to alleviate some of that burden that is so regularly on their shoulders that they have to hold by themselves.
To Pastor Timothy's point, that I think that is a great initiative, because we spend a lot of money in our classrooms. And actually, the last couple of years, the district that I'm in now, we were not given any money towards supplies. I mean, they give us what they can, but we do not get a dime towards supplies, whereby some years ago, we were given like $150, maybe $200, to buy different supplies for your classroom. So you do find yourself putting these things on your supply list for students, but 9 times out of 10, teachers are always coming out of pocket, purchasing things, because you want your children to have what they need to be successful in the classroom.
Good. There's another question here about the role, and this is for anybody. What role should Black churches play in assisting in closing the achievement gap? So the actual academic outcomes, the actual intellectual development of students. What role does a church play? Does a local church play in that?
So two pieces that I would say is to educate and to advocate. So one is around educating your congregation around the achievement gap as well. We make a whole lot of assumptions around people's knowledge around where our children are in our communities. And so how can we help to democratize information and help our people in our communities actually understand where our children are? And so that's one thing that I think the church could really play a leadership role on. The second one is advocating. So to your point around, should our church leaders be at school board? We should have church leaders at every leadership level. So both at school board, city council, county commission, and your state legislature. We want you not only to be going and speaking, you actually should be on those boards. And so how do we make sure that the representation is there and that you are advocating around issues and understanding it? One of the things that I recommend communities do is that you have a board watch where every meeting you have someone who is summarizing the issues that were presented, and then you share that out with your congregation so that they are informed and you are also speaking on it. And then you're rating your elected officials. God didn't tell us to be ignorant, and nor should we be not active around the political process. This is the work that our community should be taking on.
That's an excellent point, Kenyon, and I'm grateful for that. And I think the other thing too is that because of how the church is situated in the community, it's so different than it used to. So a lot of the direct services the churches can do, tutoring, et cetera, is not going to reach the same kind of population they once did. I mean, just change just the numbers and just where the church is in the community. So I think that a lot of our work too has to be educating our congregations, just like you said, and then pushing them out into the programs that already exist in the schools, the programs that exist in the communities. And so I think a lot of times church members have an idea of what it is to be an active member and what it is to do ministry. And so often that is tied to a specific ministry within the confines of the church, or even an education ministry, right? So it's not that these things aren't directed towards the issue, but I think we have to reimagine what it means to be active in ministry, and that some of our faith commitments, some of our church commitments actually can be done outside of the church in programs that already exist. So maybe I can't be an usher this year, maybe I can't be in the choir this year, but I'm tutoring down at the local school every day. And that is in effect how I'm serving God and serving my church, even though it's outside those 4 walls. And so with the right education and then the right push, then we can do that ministry. And then we'll have, I think, a broader effect on closing that achievement gap.
I also think too that the church community should show up also when there's not an issue. I know that we do rally up when there are some major concerns in our community, which is great, it's excellent. But I think that there should be some kind of consistency as well when things are not, going awry, that there's a presence from the church, so that they know that, okay, so we have some people that are here that are carrying this message back to those, at the different churches, so that they know what's going on in the educational system. So I think that that's an important thing too, just to be consistent in showing up.
Good. Well, so, and we're going to wrap this up soon. School is out, but to some extent, church is also out. Churches are not gathering. Resources are not as if they ever were abundant. They're significantly less abundant now than they were. How do we think about churches organizing for social justice, for advocacy in this moment of social distancing? How do we maintain the missions and the priorities of community engagement, of social justice when we're not gathering anymore? Does that matter?
It absolutely matters. And I think what we're doing now, is virtual meeting, which would have happened anyway, right? But I mean, I can't tell you the number of Zoom conferences and calls and things I've been on the last couple of weeks within the church and with other organizations. So I think people are trying to transition the methods and staying connected. But I think it actually is related to what we were saying a little while ago in terms of recognizing the context and the situation. That I think if we really want to be consistent, it has to be balanced a different way. That we can't, I'm not at all of the meetings I used to be. My schedule isn't what it used to look like in terms of community engagement, et cetera, and it can't be. And I actually think that if it was, again, if you just replaced all that you did before and you just turned it into a Zoom conference or a teleconference, FaceTime, whatever, that it actually would work against being able to maintain connectivity and productivity in this particular moment. So I think trying to find a more balanced approach will actually have greater results and greater fruit for us continuing to be connected and continue to do this work. Because like we were saying before the call, Key and I were talking that all of the numbers are beginning to come out, just like you said, Reverend Francois, about discrepancies, even in what's happening with deaths related to COVID. So all of the same discrepancies, all of the same gaps, all the same injustice that we know is still there and just magnified now. So the call is louder. I just think we have to be more intelligent about how we answer it because we have to think so much more about our well-being in the process of
it. Amen. Two things that I would say is, one, from the church perspective, you have to redefine what bedside Baptist really means and what it looks like. And so, like, I have had some amazing online services the last couple of weeks that have really fed my soul and given me clarity about other ways that I can be engaged and activated in church that I wish churches did on a regular Sunday, to be completely honest with the experience that I'm having. And so I think that this is an opportunity for us to reach even more people who are in a time of uncertainty around what's happening in the world, are looking for God and are needing a place to be able to go and seek community and security. And so that's my first point. The second one, on community, using the technology that we have available to be able to do some of the similar things for your own church. So how are you creating phone trees where you are checking on each of your members, and not just you? Much of the work in churches in the past has been done by 10% of the congregation. Now you can spread that work out to more people. And so you could actually get people to be able to be the phone lead, to be able to go and do the phone trees and check on people. And you can create a ministry that checks on your children every week and ask how the children are doing. And then you can assess the needs of your parishioners. And so those are a couple of things that I think the church can really be doing now, because one of the things as a community organizer, you got a captive audience. People can't go out in the street. They ain't really, you are at home. So how do we activate those people, activate our members, but activate our broader community and figure out how we engage? One action I would say you all can take as a church: now is a great opportunity for you to disaggregate your membership and be able to see which house district are you in, which school board districts are your members in. So you can be able to have that information. So as issues come about, you know which members are in District 7 so they can activate and go to that. That's a perfect activity that you can be undertaking and educating your members on right now.
Hey man, that's good. I just want to jump in and say one more thing too. Thank you so much for that, Kenya. And that is, now we see what is essential and what isn't essential. I think we can understand from a ministry standpoint what things we can get rid of, what things just weren't important in the grand scheme of things. And we see obviously fighting for educational development and reform within our communities is important. But we're forced really to say, well, what do we need to prune and get rid of in the life of our church that really, really wasn't about much, right? And so now we have opportunity to prune and to shift our resources to be able to better address these kind of issues.
I just want to piggyback. I agree with Ms. Kenya and Reverend Timothy. Ms. Kenya, I've had some phenomenal services as well. Like, just being able to access God. There's no excuse right now, because for me, that millennial generation is like, you ain't go to the club, you're not tired. You don't have to worry about getting a car, getting a ride. Nope, you can just go on your phone. And for the most part, 90% of us all have phones. Even my grandmother, who's 80-something, has a phone. And it's just as easy as sending a link. And I feel like you said, Reverend Timothy, the issues are still there. Even though we're in a pandemic, whether we feel that it's another issue or another mechanism of whatever, the government or whatever, if it just is, but the issues still are there and they still need to be touched upon. And right now, God is still in the midst, even though we're in a crazy circumstance. So when God is in the midst, everything's going to work out for the good anyway. So this is more ways for us to be creative, more people we can reach than what we usually wouldn't have reached. Because I know I did it on Sunday. I'm like, oh, girl, you talking about your anxiety? Come listen to my church. And they were like, oh, word. Like, you know what I mean? So I just feel like all things are going to work together for the good. And we're just going to have to look at it from a different scope and just be a little bit more creative and innovative. So that's my baby. But that's just what I want to say. And just before we close, for any parents out there, give yourself a level of grace. I am that person, like I said, it'll probably be 9 o'clock and I'll probably be working with my son. It's okay. That's why we're at home. Where you gonna go? So I just think, just give yourself a level of grace. If you're stressed out, reach out to your resources. I know we're all available, your school. And more than that, reach out to God. And I know I've also used this opportunity. I know it's separate state and church, but when I'm talking to parents and they're like, Ms. Bell, I don't know what I'm gonna do, that's a little plug for me to be like, girl, I know what you're going through, call on him. So just, I don't know, it'll get greater later, and that's it. So.
Sister Erica, I just want to piggyback off of what you're saying as far as just giving yourself grace. I just took it upon myself to go on Facebook last week just to do like a Facebook Live to help parents, give them some tips on how to balance this thing, because I know parents are just really at their wits' end. And I tried to encourage them and let them know, you're doing a great job just by being there for your child. Even if you can't help them to the capacity that you want to, just sitting there while they're working and just being present is good, is just as good. So just helping them to understand that in school, on a regular school day, no child is sitting at their desk working for 2 and 3 hours straight. Give them breaks. It's okay. Sit at the computer 20 minutes, do some work, get up, do a brain break, jump around, do some exercise, put on their favorite song, dance a little bit. Vocabulary is one of the, I love vocabulary because it covers all content area and it's all rap music and it covers every content area. Get up, look at vocabulary, turn the music all the way up, dance a little bit, then get back to work. So I'm just trying to encourage them to make it fun. Don't do it to the point where, you know, you kind of just like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you're not getting this. That's not what it's about right now. And honestly, a lot of teachers are really giving them review work right now. No one is really teaching any new content. So there's no need for the parents to really stress themselves out, because you'd be surprised what these children really know. You think that they don't know a whole lot and they're not getting it. Believe me, there is something that is landing in those little brains once they go home. So I totally agree with you. And honestly, the encouragement, that one-on-one with the parents that you don't normally get to have during the regular school year. So I just believe that, of course, God is in control of all things. I believe that he has done some things to really get our attention. He has done some things to slow things down for a lot of people, for you to reinvent yourself, for you to dig in those places that things that you've always wanted to do, get your finances in order, like they say, get your house in order. So I just believe that all things work together for the good of them. So that's what I believe. Yes.
Amen to that. Yeah.
Just one more word. There are countless number of students right now who are not safe at home. What kind of resources, can the church do for students who are in abusive, toxic homes, and they are not safe at home while they're trying to be safe from the coronavirus outside? What can the church do for those who are surviving abuse on a daily basis, and they don't even know to call it abuse? They have no outlets for reprieve of it. Is there anything the church can do? Anything our schools can do? Although both institutions are out right now. What can these two institutions do to protect these children who are in these environments 24/7 now?
Well, I think the church has to the extent that it is known, be willing to blow the whistle. That, you know, essential services are still there. All of our states have numbers and access and resources for both children that are experiencing abuse and for intimate partners that are experiencing abuse. So I think the church's role is to be able to say that, to preach and teach it, right? To let folk know that this is not God's will, right? And that we need to make sure that we are in loving community, most intimately at home, and then being willing to not support, not to cover up, not to make excuses for folk who are within the church community, whether they have a title or don't have a title, have been in 30 years, have been in 5 years, whatever the case may be, but be courageous enough to see something and say something. And I think that, the church has not always done its best at doing that, right? It's simply just saying something and not ignoring what is evident for so many of us within the congregation. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we have no idea, but oftentimes we know who walks into the church with their abuser, right? We know who's coming into the church and who, if the wrong thing is said, we preach the wrong thing, then it's going to be a bad evening, right? A bad after church for them. So we have to be willing to speak up and point people towards the resources that do exist.
I just wanted to say I was actually thinking about that today, just being a woman who formerly, I was in a marriage of domestic violence and narcissistic abuse, and God just laid that on my heart. I was like, oh my God, what about the women and the children right now who are stuck in a home with that person? And like you just said, Reverend Timothy, I know just from living that experience, if it was just more whistleblowers, if it was somebody that was like, come here, Erica, what you're going through is not okay, and you don't have to be there. I don't care about if you think you're going to be able to pay this bill, or if you're, if we just advocate more and just more of that, just calling it what it is, I think it will help so many people. Because like you said, we see the kids that either are neglected or they and you feel it, you can discern it, and we just need to take action. And I think if we just did that, because there are there's probably a plethora of families going through chaos right now, and they're not even thinking about schoolwork. They're thinking about if this dude is going to kill us all at this moment. So I just think we need to have more people ready to get on the front line and just be there, and then give resources though, like, you know, you can leave and go here, and et cetera, et cetera.
Good, good, good. Well, thank you, Darshell, Erica, Kenya, and Tim, for leading us tonight in a powerful, thoughtful, and passionate conversation around public education, racial equity, and this pandemic. I want to remind everyone that in the chat box, you'll be able to access the assessment survey so that you can start to think about your church, your ministry, what you have, and once you do that kind of soft community asset mapping, then you can start to think about where the needs are. But starting with the assets and the resources that you already have is a great way to move forward. So make sure before you log off that you pay some attention to that short assessment survey. Also, I want to remind everyone that I will I'll send that link out again, the link to the assessment survey. I'll send that out to everyone who registered for this experience. And I'll also send it out to the larger Black Church Center for Justice and Equality listserv. And I'll also make sure that you get the toolkit that has been prepared for us in partnership between the New Teacher Project and the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality. We want to make sure you have that toolkit so that you can begin to do this work. But I want to remind you that those of us who have access to this information, feel empowered. Right now, the power is democratized right now. Leadership is democratized right now. All of us are leaders in our community, and that is one of the only great things about crises, is that we all have an opportunity to allow our leadership and our agility and our flexibility to lead towards wholeness in our community. So feel free. I want you to organize the services in your community. You can organize your church, even if you're not the pastor, even if you're not the minister of this and that. You can organize in your community, and I promise you that this issue is so important that the leaders of your congregation will support you for wanting to run with this. So see yourself as an organizer for these types of services for your congregation. If there's some things, some technological things that you need help with, you can always use the email that's connected, that you received that confirmed your registration. You can hit me on that, and our team will make sure that we can help with whatever resources we can to make sure that during this time of social distancing, you have digital platforms to move forward. Also, this toolkit, make sure you share that with the leadership of your congregations, and also go as far as to put it on your website so other people can see what they can be doing and understand that your church is a part of a larger movement with local implications. Lift your voice on policy. What we know for sure is that policy is going to keep happening. Policy is going to be made, and it is often made when we are not at the table. And so we have to accept and embrace the fact that we have to be the policy drivers for our communities. And we do have the right to shift policy. You know why? Because the people who make policy are the people we put in office. Every politician works for you, even if you didn't vote for them. Every politician works for you. Anybody that gets taxpayer dollars works for you. And so we got to make our voices heard. Which means, so if we are going to direct policy, then that means we need policy agendas. So as you are organizing locally, also feel free to include in your organizing strategy the development of a local Black church and education agenda. And although it sounds simple, it can go a long way into making a difference in so many policies, whether it's connected to education segregation, funding inequity, whether it is connected to the zero tolerance discipline policies, what our school personnel look like. Do we need more diversity? Do our teachers need cultural competency training or anti-oppression training? Whatever it is, those are the types of policies that if we need to inject our curricula with more Afrocentric and Latinx material and content, we can do that too. These are all policy questions. And so see yourselves as leaders as we move forward. You'll be receiving an email if for those of us who register for this experience, and you will get the toolkit, you will get the assessment survey, and a few other things that we mentioned here. We will be hosting another town hall on economic justice and economic policy during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that will be hosted on April 29th. April 29th. You'll receive an e-blast about that as well. But April 29th at 7 o'clock, we'll be having a conversation just like this with economic justice and economic policy experts, so that we can not just educate our way through this, but we can also learn how to continue to use the resources of the government to empower the people who create the government. Right? So that's what we want to do. So I'll see you all next time we gather together. Thank you again to our 4 panelists who were absolutely brilliant tonight. And thank you for this hour and 26 minutes that you gave us to think about how we can push this revolution forward. Education equity is what we're about and is what we can achieve. Thank you.